We're off and running. Designing and engaging lectures.
Good, thank you. We are just on time. So this is a new workshop that we're offering at the CTL. It's primarily focused on how to improve your current lectures. So we will encourage you to, have a mindset of thinking about how you currently do things in your courses. Okay, so we're talking about lectures, and if you think back on, some of the good lecturers that we know, we have Steve Jobs, Al Gore, Simon Sinek. These are very popular people who have been known to give very powerful, persuasive lectures over the years. From when I was younger, this topic is very close to my heart because when I was younger, I would always be interested in how people present information and how do they make sense of how others understand information. And so I would watch, experts like these and just learn what you could get from them. Um, Next slide, Bruce. One of the key things that these three have in common is that they're very good in storytelling. They're very good in marketing, very good in promoting products, and very good in persuading you to believe an idea, right? And these are strengths that anybody who speaks to an audience can have or should have, and that makes you um, interesting. That makes you somebody that people want to listen to, and and that makes you less boring. Is what we are trying to achieve. But then, next slide, Bruce. If we look at these three experts, um, they're typically speaking to an audience and don't expect an engagement back. They don't expect you to interact with them, right? A TED Talk, which is excellent, doesn't expect you to have anything else that you will contribute to the talk. And this makes it very different from how we would approach academic content. Academic content typically needs a different approach. On top of trying to be a persuasive speaker and an engaging speaker, we have to try to move into being interactive, which means that it's not enough that we just have one person speaking in the room or one person speaking throughout the lecture. Okay, and through interactivity, we mean we have activities built in, we have intentional plans being built in, we have intentional activities that students are working on to process information and show us that they can understand and then they can get what we're trying to achieve. So, next slide, Bruce. All yours.
Thank
Forgot
you.
this.
So, as Kiran noted, we'd like you to be like those three famous presenters, but I think as instructors, we take it to the next level, or we should take it to the next level. We should have the ability to take our topic and move beyond just the explanation or just the instruction to one that we are able to have our students speak the same language that we have. And our language can take the gamut from the explanation, the demonstration, the structured plan, but to have the students be able to not only speak the same language, but when they speak it in the context that they should do it as persons who are knowledgeable. So how can we take that information and translate it so that your students can speak your language? To do that, we have to hold our students accountable based on when things are due, or accountable to knowing reading, because we know, Sharon will agree with me, our students do read before they come to class. So we have to have them be actively engaged in the content beyond just watching us. They have to be able to do it. They have to be able to demonstrate it, to show it. And that show comes in terms of the evidence, where we know that from the point of the faculty explaining it to the student being able to articulate it, we know that there has been that transformation or that translation of content to tangible knowledge of your topic. So the great debate today in our new normal is that we are faced not with two types of delivery, face to face and online, Bruce. So that's a simple thing. Instead, we have, let's say, 11 methods in which to deliver our course. And as you can see here, both from the gamut of a recorded asynchronous or recorded synchronous, or the word now is simulcast, relying on different media beyond just the text, that PDF. Now we're getting into media. We're getting into YouTube. We're moving beyond just a text base. We have to incorporate so much more beyond just the lectures that many of us are attuned to and comfortable with. In other words, Kieran and I want to pull you out of your comfort zone, away from just the mere lectures, and be able to articulate that same language that you want your students to understand and use different means to do so. Now, if you ask both of us, okay, Kieran, Bruce, you have explained to us the transition we need to make. Therefore, if we do it this way, it will work. And our answer is, it depends. I know it sounds like a cop-out, right? But it depends. It depends on what tools you're going to use. It depends on your topic. It depends on you as the subject matter expert, the way that you're going to present or articulate it. It really depends on a lot of things. And so what we're going to do today is to hopefully get beyond that depend and give you some tangible methods and processes that you can use to get into that engaging lectures, and not the one that I just sit, watch, and then hopefully I'm good. As we look at the synchronous, asynchronous, both have advantages. I don't need to read all of this, but for me, as an instructional designer and as one who has taught courses, I believe very fervently that if we develop a very strong course that is foundationally built on an online course foundation that has that strong navigation, strong learner design, we're able to give the students that self-directed way of learning. It will then support whether you're going from the asynchronous lectures that are depicted here in this table over to the simulcast, again depicted in this table. Both have advantages, but I believe that once you develop your course in that strong online method, it will support both. Whether you start teaching in one way and have to switch, it doesn't matter. It will support the way that you deliver your courses. But again, both have their advantages, as you note. There are many tools that one will be able to use. And while we're using Zoom here for this presentation, just recognize that the university, at least for the next semester, if not for the next year, we will have options to go from Zoom and WebEx. And so you'll notice that these tools have some features about it that you can utilize, and we would encourage you to utilize it in a way that you can actively engage your students as you present your content and get them to be actively engaged with you. We're not going to, however, talk a lot about technology, but we just wanted to show you this.
We have 3 weeks, and as you approach the semester where there's a lot of uncertainty, and you're not sure how things might run the first week, how things might run the second week because of a different modality you might be using. Today you might be using hybrid, you might be using a blend of hybrid and online and synchronous and asynchronous. And so this workshop hopefully will help you plan how to deliver that lecture. So our next slide, Bruce. Today we're covering 2 major topics. It's quite new, so we hope that we can learn the language of what we call lecture mapping and lecture design patterns. When we say lecture mapping, this means we're going to actually create a map, a simple map, And as you create maps, there are certain patterns that you can apply that makes your lecture effective. So we're going to present those today. Next slide, Bruce. One more.
Oh, that was the next slide. Sorry.
I know. Let's go to the next one.
All right.
Okay, so we start with the mapping, okay? So we're gonna move on to our first activity, which starts with us having a mindset on your lecture. Okay, I want you to bring about your first week or second week. Try to recall that lecture that you would typically give, okay? Now, if you think about that lecture is actually a learning event, right? When we say an event, this means that there's a sequence of activities, just like a party. If you're an event planner, a party planner, you would account for the things that happen in the beginning, the things that happen in the middle, things that happen at the end. So I want you to think about your lecture now as a sequence of activities. Try to recall in your 45, 55, 60-minute, 90-minute, 75-minute lecture, however long you typically would have a class session, what are the activities that you would have your students do, and how did you chunk them? You know, typically you would try to plan something for the first few minutes and then move on to another activity, move on to another activity, move on to another activity. So I want you to think about what would be your typical sequence of activities. What would you ask students to do? What would you be doing? List them under column 1. And then for each of those, think about how long do you normally spend doing some of those. Okay, so imagine you have a lecture, you have a topic. It might be 75 minutes, it might be 90 minutes, it might be 55 or 45, however long. And then think about that breakdown of what that looks like. Okay, when you go to this link, you'll be seeing a template on slide number 1. You'll make a copy of this slide so that you have your own table for your own copy of your own lecture sequence. Now that you have your first lecture map, where you listed the sequence of what happens in a lecture and how long it takes, it's actually quite tangible and you can show this to somebody else. And having it in a written document, like a simple table, creates your first lecture map, which allows you to track what you wanted to do and intend to do, and maybe later how you even did it. Okay, so now that we have some idea of a lecture map, you want to think about your lecture differently in the sense that what you do, everything that you do in a lecture, from giving instructions, reviewing with your class, giving a quiz, discussing topics, discussing theories, discussing concepts. When I go through the list, I see that you're typically doing some activities with students, like Sharon has written here that after discussing the introduction to cells, she goes into doing a lucid chart and asking students to do an activity through a Venn diagram, right? So these are all parts of the lecture where you have different elements happening. And we have others doing an introduction, have everybody introduce themselves. That's part of your first day lecture, right? Or discussing the syllabus, that's part of your first day lecture. So all of these become part of your plan, right? Now, you take a step back. Bruce, let's move to the slide on the elements. And you think all activities you do throughout the semester in every class can actually be categorized in 6 simple elements. That activity that you do will either be a set of instructions you're giving students, or it might be a set of information or content that you're presenting to them, or you're asking them to access, right? For example, you might be presenting PowerPoint slides, or you might be giving them something to read. You might be giving them a website to access. It's all information giving. That's a second element. Third element, some lectures or most lectures typically should have element of practice. Once new information is given or information is reviewed, there could be a sense of practice. Having students do something with it. And then there's dialogue, that fourth element in the orange box. Have students talk about it. or you talk about it with them, and they talk about it among each other. The sense of discussion happening in a lecture. Another element would be evidence, where you assess if students are able to achieve the goal of that lecture, maybe through a quiz, maybe through an exercise that's graded. Okay. And the last one is feedback. Feedback sometimes is an element where, as practice is happening, you're giving feedback. As discussion is happening, you're giving feedback. If you just think of every activity that you've ever done in a lecture, you would typically be able to categorize them as one of these elements. Okay? So Bruce, if you click several times and showed all the bullet points, instructions would typically be the mechanics, housekeeping, reminders, introductions. No, these are all part of instructions and mechanics. Typically, information is teacher delivered content or student delivered content. This might be student presentation. This might be coming from a textbook, might be articles that you have them read, a PowerPoint you share, videos you show, no? Even sometimes video conferencing, or what we, when you do a Zoom class and you're having live discussions, it's all part of information giving and information sharing. Practice would be activities that you do for formative development, dialogue, any form of discussion or reflection. Evidence would be summative activities, which means there's a high stakes assessment to it, um, or some kind of graded activity. And then feedback. Feedback can come in the form of instructor comments, student feedback, peer feedback, asking students to answer a survey, right? So I want you to think about these pieces, because once you detach yourself from your lecture as what you do and think of them as elements, then you can easily plan and change as the semester goes by. In this presentation, we're going to show you 6 design patterns that actually will show you different ways to organize these elements so that you can have more interactive and effective lectures. Bruce, all yours.
Thank you. So design patterns, see them as ways that purposeful or intentional way of delivering your content. And as Kiran noted, we have 6. They're based on engagement, but more moving away from that passive delivery to an active participation between you and your students. So on the left, you see we have Captain Hook all the way down to wellness. So I'm going to go through each of them and describe how you can utilize those in your classroom. So Captain Hook, why Captain Hook? Well, think of it as the carrot and stick approach. I want to give something, but I want to make it in a way that the students know they're getting back something. So you can pose a challenge. So one of the things I wanted to do for the delivery of this presentation was to have a quiz, or not even a quiz, but a riddle. I want to put a riddle to pose a challenge for you to begin thinking. And that riddle would build on what we're going to be talking about during the class. If you're in a science course, why not present a challenging question the first time the students come in? That builds on what they should have read, what they should have watched, the quiz that they should have taken, the discussion forum that they should have participated, the assignment that they should have completed before your Zoom course or before the next segment of this discussion. So you're building by posing a challenge. You're setting the stage now for the lesson, and you're sending that message, that hook, to students that if you did not do what was supposed to have done before, there is no way for you to meet this challenge, to meet this problem, and to be able to answer it. It doesn't have to be anything that's bland, such as biology. Oops. But it could be, I'm sorry, Sharon, I'm just teasing you, but it could be event, news event, news event of how can I mix lemonade with coffee? That's something that's more biological or chemistry. It sets the stage for the next lesson as you move forward. So Captain Hook. And you notice, even though we could do this for 90 minutes, it's really one part of the items that we're going to be using in our course. Okay, so that's good old Captain Hook. The next one is demo. I like this one. I do, the faculty. We do, the class. You do, the students. I do, we do, you do. So you're more or less, I think Kieran would describe this as the cooking show. I show you how you can make a nice Jamaican jerk chicken. And then we go back and together we all, do it. And then I say, for homework, you go ahead. And I don't want you to just make a jerk chicken, but I want you to make a jerk chicken with a flavor of something that you like. I do, we do, you do. Now you notice it starts out with that information. You're giving the students or you're showing the students something that takes 30 minutes. And then we have a dialogue about it in the wider group as to why this worked, how this worked, and how we can make it better. And then off they go to practice it. Now that practice can happen within the 60 minutes of the class, but it doesn't prevent you to say to the students, this is something like a homework that you have to go outside of the class to do. Let's utilize the time outside, that asynchronous point, for the students to practice. And built into the dialogue and built into the practice is the ability for students to have some conversation, a peer conversation with each other, have a peer conversation with you. We're building all of that in to the I do, we do, you do. Okay? All right. I see smiles on people's face, so let me move on to the check and review. Think of the car, okay? The good old car. So this one is slightly different because now we have divided it into asynchronous and synchronous. So we're saying if your class is 60 minutes, do not front load it and hope that you are able to do everything there. Use the opportunity for a pre, the in class, and a post. So for this one, we decided to use the pre. There's some pre-work. There is some information or an article or a research article that the students have to read, and to hold them accountable, I want them to practice, whether it's an assessment quiz or an assessment assignment. And I'm using that to gauge a student's knowledge by giving them some foundational work. Now, when they're in the 60-minute class, I don't have to worry about that foundational part. I can now get into the nitty-gritty of the evidence, the heavy lifting information that they need to build on based on the foundational knowledge. So now I can get more elaborate in the knowledge. I can get more elaborate in the information review. I can get more elaborate in the feedback that I give to the students. So check would be the pre-work. And then as I build the evidence, I'm building it that we can review based on what they should have known and based on the evidence that I've given them. Look, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. This could have taken 30 minutes, but I use that pre-work to take that time outside. So now I have time to do other things plus building on their foundational knowledge. If you have questions as you go along, please post it and we'll circle back to these items. Number 4 is called PPE. Now, who came up with that? Present, pause, and explain. Thank you, Kieran. So present, pause, explain. Again, let's break it up for the pre-work and break it up for the in-class, that synchronous part. But we're going to use that as a means of reflection. You know, there are times when we're so caught up in our class, do we have time to figure out if Bruce actually got this information? How can I build that in? So the present, pause, explain does that. Again, pre-work, practice, dialogue. Then we're able to present show solutions, and I want that pause. I want that pause to stop and probably use a poll and say, did you get this? Probably use the opportunity, maybe a breakout room. Did you understand this? Prove it. Show me by talking with your peers and build out, hopefully, new knowledge, building on what you got from the practice, building on what you got from the information. Let me tell you this, and you know this, as students are able to explain or articulate using their knowledge and language that they're gaining, they're building their understanding even more so. The dialogue allows you to do that. And then you can break off with that explanation, that why, that clarification, because based on what they were talking about in the dialogue, you're noticing the strengths and the weaknesses in their understanding. And you notice the beauty about this. You don't have to be the one talking. Your students are now begin to talk because they're now articulating the same language that you know so well. So present, pause, and explain, PPE. All right, the fifth one, muddy points. A lot of us know this already, but the muddy points, more or less, we can use it, at the end of a class. We're having gone through the lecture, the demonstration, the students dialogue with themselves. We can stop and say, okay, everyone, what is it that you learned? Tell me the two top things that you learned. Tell me one thing that you didn't understand that is burning or is preventing you from moving forward to be able to complete the assignment I'm going to give you. And then what about this? Tell me what more you would like to know about X. That's the muddiest point. Again, you're getting the students to articulate beyond just, okay, I listened, you poured your knowledge into my head, I'm good. No, I want you now to think beyond that. Matter of fact, in the muddiest point, many faculty will tell you that they gather questions, potential questions, that they can probably use in a mid-semester or in a final semester, because now they know exactly what are the challenges, where is it that students say that they understand, and what is it that they'd like to know more about. You can now utilize those muddiest points, not only to make the clarification, but use those as actual exam questions for mid and final semester. And as you notice at the bottom, we have tools that you can utilize to do the muddiest point. The final one, close to our heart, is that wellness check. There's a lot of stress that's occurring. Stress with us as faculty, stress with the students in terms of their well-being, concerned about family, concerned about studying, concerned about their health, all of those things. Are there ways that we can build that in? And if you remember, the PPE, the present, pause, and explain, we brought in that dialogue. But even if you're using, say, the demo, can you not use a wellness check to check in on the students? If not their health concern, because there's only so much we can ask, but how well are they doing in terms of studying? How well are they doing in terms of their understanding? How well are they doing in terms of their practice part? And it can be done a before exam, and it can even done like a post-exam debrief. Well, however, you can have the students articulate, share in a very safe space, that builds that dialogue to really strengthen the wellness check between you and your students. Again, there are the tools. So those are the 6 items, the 6 design patterns that you can utilize. And we're not saying, for instance, Captain Hook, that you use Captain Hook right across, but consider this. For my class, I could decide to use Captain Hook, check and review, muddy points. And within that, I'm building lecture, I'm building demonstration, I'm building dialogue, I'm building practice, I'm building evaluation. But I am chunking it in a way that the students are able to understand in small bites, that at the end of it, they get the what? The big picture. The big picture, and they're able to talk your language. So what we want to do, what you want you to do, is to go back to that Google slide that you had copied, and you had put in the first two, the activities and the time. The third one was the design pattern. Try to integrate now your design pattern in a way that you can build on what you did. So, Karen?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. The design patterns are something you might think, oh, they're so common. Like, I already do this, right? You might actually be doing it, but did you ever plan for it? Did you actually write it down and say, oh, yeah, I've actually spent 20 minutes doing this, 10 minutes doing this, 5 minutes doing this? So, one of the reasons we have these patterns as a concept in learning design is because we want to be very intentional. Very intentional. Also, perhaps build consistency throughout lectures so students know what to expect. Sometimes if you have a pattern or a way of doing things, students will be able to engage with you because they know what to expect and they can be ready ahead of time, right? One of the things that we are noticing when we do online lectures, for example, even online webinars, is it takes more time to switch between activities. It takes more time to move from the first block you had in mind to the second block you had in mind to the third block you had in mind. Sometimes links don't work, like mine. It didn't work again. Last time it didn't work too, right? And it happens no matter how much you prepare. I've checked that, but somehow it didn't work again. Right? And that's okay. Giving time like a buffer, to sort of think about, if things don't work, how can I mitigate and what can I do? So if you look at an example on the screen, this is an example, right? There could be a review followed by a little lecture activity with another activity, a discussion, a Q&A. And we didn't put any specifics here because you might have your own depending on your topic and depending on what you actually do in your content in your class. But each of these sequence of activities, like we said, can have a corresponding element that you associate it to. Maybe two. Like in the third item on the screen, you have activity. That activity might actually have a set of instructions followed by a practice activity, right? Look at discussion. You might have a dialogue activity followed by some feedbacking that needs to happen. Sometimes the elements have sisters and brothers. They go hand in hand. Instructions always go with practice. Practice usually might have feedback. Dialogue might have feedback, right? There's hand in hand. These go together, but it creates a flow in your mind. And when you have a plan, every box that you have planned actually becomes an event that you plan for. So every box there might be something you have to switch between when you do an online lecture. So we want you to attempt this. Now take a stab at classifying your sequence of activities. Going back to your slide earlier, you'll have in the bottom row the different boxes. Each of these boxes is an element. You can copy paste these boxes. They're just shapes. Select them, copy paste them, and drag them to the specific activity row and try to create that sequence of boxes. And this might be the first time you might have to do this in Google Slides, but try to do it and see if you can achieve it. If you have a hard time copy pasting these elements, you can just type them into the row. That should be okay too. That it's a table that you could just fill in. But the boxes will help you see a more visual structure of your lecture.
Awesome. Thank you.
I want to make a point. Sharon, thank you for sharing. One of the things that as you talk through your lecture, you automatically talked about not only what you want to do, but how you wanted to implement it using that tool. Like, I will do it using Zoom breakout groups. I'm going to probably do this and switch to that. I used to do it in the classroom this way. For example, the Venn diagram. Now I'm going to have to rethink how to do that kind of activity, right? It really tells you, as you think through elements, and you will have to think about specific tools that needs to be used for each of these elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Example, if you have instructions or content information, how are you going to deliver, or how are students going to give you information, right? If you want dialogue, how are you going to engage in dialogue, or how are they going to engage in dialogue? If you need to do feedback, how are you going to give feedback? How are they going to get feedback? How are they going to talk about, give each other feedback? Really, it's a very interesting way to plan not only the lecture sequence, but all the implementation strategies that you want to associate each of these with. So it's a very good way to prepare and practice your lecture, especially if you're going to go online for the first time. I will tell you, it's going to not work very well, right? So you want to plan every box on screen. Typically requires you to switch or use a tool to do it, a method to do it, right? It's what we call a strategy. There's a strategy to do. And the more boxes you have, the more things you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
The more things you need to do, the more time it takes. The more time it takes, the more you run out of time. So you want to be very intentional, like, and plan. If this is 5 minutes, add a little buffer, make that 7. If this is 10 minutes, add a little buffer, make it 12. Because if you're going to do this online, it's going to be different. Even when I do lectures face to face, like a webinar or training, I talk much faster face to face. But when it's online, I've trained myself to speak slower because sometimes internet lags. Sometimes people miss it. Sometimes somebody distracts you, right? Sometimes the cat, dog, the child, whatever. You want to really plan a different way of doing things because we're approaching a different modality completely in the fall. So having a plan helps you practice, helps you prepare, helps you plan. Not only that, helps you change. This is too long. But you know where it's too long. You're not going to redo everything. Just redo that part. Right? So today, this whole point of doing a map, there's so much value in writing it down, looking at what are all of these things I'm doing, which tools am I going to use to do all of this? Is it Zoom all the way? Or am I going to have to switch to a website and ask students to go to Google Slides, and then it's not going to work, and then it's going to come back and go back to Zoom and go back to Google? All of these are accounted for in your time. Right? You only have so much time. Right? So some of the things to reflect on as you look at your map today, and as you leave this workshop, taking this map with you, you'll have access to this. I will email you the Google link after, so you'll have access to this. Number one, how much am I doing within the time I have? Is it too much? Is it too little? Have I planned it and thought it through? Right? You want to be thinking about it now and prepare for it. It's not going to be easy the first time if you're going to do a different modality. Number two, what's the variety of mapping elements I have? Are they all information? We want more than information, right? There's now 6 options you have, not just information. You want to go beyond just talking and giving information. You want to engage in practice. You want to engage in dialogue. You want to provide feedback. You want to pause, right? And take a moment. You want to check for muddy points. You want to check, did you do the work beforehand? You want to do a review. There's so many things you can do to make this more interesting and more engaging. But it starts with framing yourself, moving away from one box, which is information, to try to bring in other elements. And then you can decide what these elements might be depending on the topic, depending on the time, depending on the skill, depending on where you are in the semester. As Bruce said, it depends. Right? There's no answer, but there is better ways to do things. Right? And that's so much things to reflect. Number 3, last thing to reflect is, are you actually using a pattern that we presented earlier? Are you already doing a hook? Do you have some points of muddy points, muddy checkpoints, points of muddy? Do you have the opportunity to present and pause and have students explain, right? You want to be able to use some of these in planning and redesigning your lecture to be more engaging. Okay, so on the screen, you'll see as you look at the time elements, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, sometimes the longer it is, the more elements it might have. The shorter it is, the fewer elements it should have, ideally, right? That's like almost logical, but definitely that will vary. So the map can, however you use this map is up to you. However you feel you found value in today's activities, up to you. But the point is to help you plan and prepare more intentional lectures and more interactive lectures for the fall.